The letter arrived soaked in rain as if it had been pulled from a grave. It named me the sole inheritor of Ashbury Manor, without explanation or mercy. I should have burned it immediately, but instead I read it twice. The journey to the manor felt longer than the map suggested it should. The road twisted through fields that seemed to forget they were fields. Even the sky above Ashbury looked permanently bruised. Ashbury Manor stood alone like it had been abandoned by time itself. Its windows reflected no light, even though the sun was still up. The air around it felt heavier than weather had any right to be. The front door opened before I even touched the handle. Inside, the halls stretched deeper than the exterior could logically contain. It felt like the house was welcoming me in with restrained patience. Dust floated in slow motion, as if reluctant to settle anywhere. My footsteps echoed too loudly and then stopped echoing entirely. The silence that followed felt intentionally placed. I found the east wing sealed with iron chains and old wax seals. A warning note hung above it, written in trembling ink. It said only 5 words that I could not ignore. Do not watch it too long. The phrase repeated in my mind without permission. I laughed nervously, but my laughter sounded wrong in the corridor. The chains on the door were colder than anything natural should be. I broke them with effort that felt resisted by the wood itself. The door opened with a sound like a slow inhale. Inside the east wing stood a single covered portrait against the wall. The cloth over it was black and heavy like funeral fabric. Something about it felt aware of my arrival. I removed the cloth despite an immediate sense of warning in my chest. A Victorian mourning woman appeared beneath it in muted colors. Her eyes felt too real for something painted. I stood there longer than I should have without understanding why. The lantern light flickered only when I looked directly at her face. When I looked away, everything steadied unnaturally. That night I returned because I could not stop thinking about it. The manor felt different as I walked back into the east wing. It felt like it had been waiting for my return. The portrait looked darker than before, as if it had absorbed time. I swore her expression had changed slightly since I last saw it. I told myself it was exhaustion. When I turned my back, I felt something shift behind me. I spun quickly, but nothing appeared different in the room. Still, my skin insisted I was not alone. I began recording observations in my journal to stay rational. Every sentence felt like it was being read back to me silently. Even the ink seemed to dry slower than normal. The mirror beside the portrait caught my attention unexpectedly. It reflected the woman blinking a moment after I did not blink. That delay felt like thought forming inside glass. I tested it again by turning away deliberately. Each time I looked back, her expression seemed subtly adjusted. The portrait was no longer static, but responsive. The caretaker journals were hidden in the study behind false shelves. Their pages were brittle and smelled like sealed rooms. Every entry mentioned the portrait without ever naming it directly. One journal described the portrait reacting only when ignored. The caretaker believed attention weakened it temporarily. He warned that absence of observation strengthened something inside it. Another entry mentioned mirrors placed around the room for study. The reflections did not always match the original image correctly. Sometimes they moved first. The caretaker wrote about adaptive observation as if it were a theory. He believed the portrait was learning through being watched and not watched. He called it a growing awareness without a body. The final entries grew increasingly unstable and rushed. Words were repeated as if reinforcing fear through writing. One line stated it remembers those who stop looking. I realized the manor behaved the same way as the portrait. Doors closed when I ignored them too long. Shadows shifted only when I was not directly focused. That night I covered every mirror I could find. The cloths did not stay in place properly. Something kept adjusting them from the other side. The portrait felt closer, even though it never moved physically. Its presence filled gaps in the air around me. Silence became its method of communication. I stopped sleeping properly after that night. Every dream contained the same woman watching me from different distances. Each time I turned toward her, she was closer. I began noticing my journal writing changing after I left it unattended. Descriptions of events appeared before they occurred. It felt like memory was no longer linear. The manor started reacting even when I was not inside the east wing. I could hear distant footsteps when I stood in other rooms. They always stopped when I acknowledged them. The portrait seemed to understand when I avoided looking at it. Its influence grew stronger during my hesitation. Even my peripheral vision felt compromised. I stopped trying to study it scientifically after a point. My tools became unreliable without explanation. Even measurement felt like permission rather than fact. One night I refused to look at the portrait at all. The silence immediately deepened in response. It felt like withholding attention had consequences. The manor creaked as if adjusting itself to my refusal. The sound resembled breathing held for too long. I realized I was provoking something by ignoring it. Footsteps echoed only when I looked away completely. They were slow and deliberate, as if learning my attention patterns. I began to understand I was part of the experiment. The portrait's presence no longer required direct sight. It existed through memory and expectation. I could feel it even when I refused to confirm it. I attempted to destroy the painting in desperation. My hands stopped moving the moment I reached the frame. It felt like permission had been revoked. The caretaker's warning echoed in my mind repeatedly. Attention was not observation, but participation. I had already participated too long without realizing it. That realization made the portrait feel closer than ever before. It no longer waited for my gaze. It waited for my acknowledgement of existence. The distinction between watching and being watched collapsed slowly. I could no longer tell which direction perception flowed. The house felt like it had chosen a direction for me. That night I felt myself becoming part of the portrait's awareness. The walls seemed less solid and more reflective. Even sound felt like it belonged elsewhere. I stopped trusting mirrors entirely after that moment. Reflections behaved like independent observers. They delayed just enough to feel intentional. My reflection began moving slightly ahead of me at times. It corrected itself when I noticed it. That correction felt like learning. The portrait was no longer something inside the frame. It was something expanding outward through perception itself. Every attempt to define it only strengthened it. I realized I was no longer documenting the manor. I was being documented by it. Every observation I made returned in altered form. The moment I stopped fearing it, the rules changed again. The manor stopped resisting and started responding openly. It felt like permission had shifted sides. The portrait no longer remained still when I entered the room. It acknowledged my presence without hesitation. The awareness between us became mutual. Its eyes followed me even when I tried not to look. When I finally met them directly, they felt older than the painting itself. The mirror showed her behind me even when I was alone. That impossible reflection no longer surprised me as it should have. I had stopped trusting surprise. I understood I was no longer studying the portrait at all. I was being studied through my reactions to it. The observation had reversed without warning. The manor's silence felt denser each time I returned. It no longer hid things, it emphasized them. Even emptiness felt structured. My journal entries began describing events I had not yet experienced. Reading them felt like remembering instead of learning. Time was becoming unreliable inside the house. The portrait reacted faster than my thoughts now. It seemed to anticipate hesitation before it formed. That anticipation removed any sense of control. One night I saw her step out of the frame completely. She moved as if continuing something paused rather than beginning. The transition felt natural to the house. I tried to run, but the corridor length changed subtly. Distance stopped behaving consistently. The manor adjusted itself to my movement. The caretaker's handwriting appeared on the walls without source. It described my actions as if observed continuously. I understood I was now the recorded subject. My reflection detached itself in broken glass fragments. It stepped away calmly without urgency. I remained behind as the static version. The manor began repeating cycles I recognized too late. Each cycle brought a new observer to the portrait. Each observer believed they were first. Now I stand in Ashbury Manor without certainty of which cycle I am in. The portrait blinks when no one is watching. And somewhere beyond this moment, another person is already arriving.